Good morning, class. I'm Socrates. I'll be your substitute teacher this morning and guest lecturer. Professor Litchfield asked me to come and speak to you today because you're about to discuss business ethics, and many scholars regard me as the father of Western ethics. Not a whole lot of things are known about me that can be declared to be hard and fast facts because while I was alive, I never wrote anything down. Virtually everything that's known about me was told about me later by my students like Plato, Aristophanes, Alcibiades. They wrote about me later, and that is how I became so well known. So some of the things I'm going to tell you may or may not be absolute fact, but as best we know, I was born around 570 AD. My father was a stonemason. My mother was a midwife. And I didn't marry until I was about 50 years old, but when I did marry, my wife had a reputation for being, well, shall we say, unpleasant. In fact, one of my famous sayings is, by all means, a young man should get married. If he gets a good wife, he'll be happy. But if he gets a bad wife, then he'll become a philosopher. So, I was also a soldier in the war, and apparently I was a pretty brave soldier. In fact, there's one story that during one battle, I rescued a famous general. And when I was put on trial later on, one of the things that I said during the trial was, apparently those of you who think that a person who's in court should back off from their position in court is the same kind of person who would think that a soldier in battle should run away when he thinks he might be killed. As you might imagine, I was not the most successful in the area of tact when I was put on trial, but we'll get to that in a minute. The times in Athens at the time that I was a philosopher there were difficult and challenging times for the city-state of Athens. We had been in a many years long series of wars with the city-state of Sparta, and we had lost many of those battles, and it was a time when people were challenging everything. They were challenging whether or not democracy as a form of government might be the best form of government for Athens. After all, Sparta was not a democracy, and they seemed to be doing better than us. But they questioned young people in particular that were my students, they were questioning everything, including whether or not the gods really existed. These times were not a whole lot different from the times that you're in right now. But students would come to me, the young students, and they would say, what do you think, Socrates? Do the gods really exist? And I said to them, I don't have any proof as to whether or not the gods really exist. I only know this. I know that by my choosing to live my life as if the gods do exist, that has enabled me to live a happier and finer life. So eventually I was convicted by the court in the city-state of Athens for corrupting the morals of the youth of Athens and for refusing to worship the gods chosen by the state. And I was sentenced to death. But before that, I had problems. I was somewhat politically unpopular. I was known as the gadfly of Athens. That's a stinging fly that will sting a horse over and over again until finally the horse is irritated enough that it will move. So I was somewhat of a gadfly. The trouble for me really started, though, when my friend Chaerephon went up to the great oracle of Delphi, the temple with the priestesses of Apollo, and he asked the oracle of Delphi, "Oh great oracle, who is the wisest man in all of Athens?" And the priestess said, "There is none wiser in all of Athens than Socrates." So my friend Chaerephon comes running back down the mountain, and he finds me and he says, "Dude, Socrates, the oracle of Delphi says you are the wisest man in all of Athens." And I said, what? That can't possibly be true. Athens is filled with incredibly wise people, doctors, scientists, lawyers, politicians. All of those people know all kinds of stuff. How could I possibly be the wisest man in all of Athens? Chaerephon says, I don't know, but that's what the priestess says. Well, okay, let's go talk to some of these people, because surely there must be people that are wiser than me. So we went around and we interviewed, basically got into dialogue with some of the wisest people in Athens, lawyers, doctors, politicians, scientists, and we would ask them questions. And there was a repeating pattern of the way they would respond. Initially, they would all be all puffed up with how smart they were and everything they knew. But we would begin asking them questions and questions and questions. And as we asked them more and more questions and they struggled to find answers, we realized, although almost all of them acted like they knew a lot, in reality they really didn't know very much at all. And so in the end, I finally said, wow, you know, perhaps it is possible that I am, in fact, the wisest man in Athens, because at least I know that I know nothing. And perhaps knowing that you know nothing makes you the wisest man in all of Athens. So that's how the trouble started, because I got into this pattern of asking people these burning questions and making them feel awkward about the answers. And there were at least two times that I got into so much trouble I was almost executed prior to the time that I ended up going to trial and being sentenced to death. One time, it was my turn to be the judge on the court. And the way we did the courts in those days is there were a number of different tribes in the city-state of Athens, and to make sure that everyone got a fair trial, we rotated who sat on the court as a judge through the various tribes. And that particular time period, it was my turn to be sitting as the judge. And what happened was there had been a battle, a naval battle, one of the rare ones where Athens beat Sparta. But what happened was there were 6 generals that had been so hot to pursue the fleeing Spartan navy that they chased after the fleeing Spartan navy and they abandoned some burning and sinking Greek ships, and the Greek sailors were left to drown. And the people of Athens were so angry about this, they grabbed those 6 generals and they hauled them in before the court, and they wanted to try them all at the same time and execute them. And I said, no. You must abide by the laws of the city-state of Athens. These are Athens citizens, and by law, you can't just grab them all as a group, try them all as a group and execute them. They're entitled to a separate trial. So I refused the mob's demands that we execute these 6 generals, and they said, well, then we're just going to execute you too. Only thing that saved me that time was the next day it was time to rotate the judges to some other tribe, and I got out of there without being executed and without sentencing these men to death. The second time I got into trouble, there was a coup, a political coup. It was called the Tyranny of the 30. It was a group of people who took over the government of Athens, and they were consolidating their power, picking out who was for them and who was against them, and eliminating some of their adversaries. And they ordered me, along with 4 or 5 other guys, to go down to the village of Salamis and pick up this guy named Leon and drag him back to Athens so he could be tried and executed by the tyrants. Well, I refused to go. And they probably would have put me on their bad guys list, their adversaries list, and executed me too. The only thing that saved me that time was that the coup was overthrown before they could get to me. I went home. I refused to be a part of basically lynching Leon of Salamis.